Welcome to today's episode of T3 Summit. And today's question is 20 years in Afghanistan, was it worth it? And I have with myself, we have
Ramla Kaka, Skull,
and myself, Preach. And so, let's get into it. So, my opinion, 20 years, was it worth it? It's hard to say, to be honest. I think there's two sides of it, really. I think in the short term, the West taking out Al Qaeda in the short term, yes, they achieved that, which is successful. In terms of the long term, I don't think so as much because there was obviously the offshoot of Al Qaeda that turned into the Islamic State, as we all know. And I do believe there's a lot of benefits to going into Afghanistan because if you look at the ages of people who are of the age of, let's say, now currently 25, so people who are born kind of the late 90s, they've had an entire generation of people who were living not under the Taliban rule, which means you had a lot of women who were able to go to university and study and progress their lives in a very positive way. Obviously, many of them might have gone abroad and used their education elsewhere to have a better life. There's an entire generation that obviously did flourish as a result of the Taliban not being in power. But obviously now the Taliban is back, and the long-term implications of what the West did, they actually not only handed the Taliban, not only handed power back to the Taliban, but also they're actually now in control of many areas that they weren't in control of before. So it's a very hazy subject. I can't really give a straight answer. What's your view on this?
My view? What was the question in the first place? Was it worth it after 20 years? But was it worth it for who? Like, which perspective are we talking? The people that went in, like the objective of
for all
the
sides.
People that went in, or
I think for
the people that unfortunately, like victims, as you can say, how it was for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A lot of people obviously died in the process. But I think we're talking more about the Western powers and the people of Afghanistan.
Okay, was it worth it, right? Was it worth it for America? It depends. It depends what America's objective was to go in there in the first place for.
But their objective initially.
But what we hear normally on the news and wherever we read, which 60-70% of the people follow, what America's objective was, they said it was for getting Al Qaeda and it was to get redemption for the Twin Towers and such. But there's talk of money and how there's some rich people out there and rich defense companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and such, that they were profiting a lot from the war itself. Like, war generates money. That war cost them how many £1 trillion? Someone had to pay that. It came out of someone's pocket. And when government borrow money to finance projects, it normally goes back to the taxpayer that has to put money towards that project. So it comes out of the taxpayer's money, and it comes out of a lot of debt that the government owes to have bought those fucking massive contracts. Someone is buying those contracts. You've got companies like the defense companies. They're buying the contracts of all this military.
So was it worth it?
And it's the owners, for them it's worth it. For the defense contractors, it was well worth it.
I think it's got a good point.
They earn mega money.
Yeah, it depends.
But at the other side of it, was it worth it for the Afghan people? Well, they were under Taliban rule before.
I think temporarily.
Yeah. And for 20 years, they got to taste Western freedom.
Yes. And that's a very important factor.
Okay. But was it worth it in terms of what, death? Like, what is war?
What about
war is
for
death,
US?
right? War is death, yeah, were people dying under Taliban rule before West went in, or did more people die during the war when they pulled out? Were the Afghan people resisting for their freedom, or did they let the Taliban just run them through because they didn't want any violence anymore? They felt like America come in, started all this war for fucking 20 years. We just got out of a Soviet war. Soviets were in our country fucking needling us all this time. We just dealt with war. Now we've got peace under the Taliban, whatever peace under Taliban is like. People weren't dying. Yeah, you didn't.
Well, it depends.
They suffered in other ways. They got fucking women got locked in their houses and such, but there was peace on the streets, right?
Do you measure?
And then they had another 20 years of war. Was it worth it? Yeah, it was for Americans. Temporarily, it was for the Afghans if they wanted freedom, but most of their cousins died with it.
Do you only measure success by death count?
No,
because
let
me answer the question first, which was originally posed anyway. I would say, in terms of their initial objective of degrading Al Qaeda, it was a success. They had, after 9/11, America had to do something. These attacks were planned from Afghanistan. Al Qaeda were running a state within a state in Afghanistan, with the Taliban being their host. They had to get rid of them. And by and large, they did. You have other branches in the world of Al Qaeda, but the Afghan one was degraded. In terms of nation building, which seems to be their second objective, I think it's very hard at this point to say it's succeeded, due to the fact that the Taliban have taken back control. But like you said,
more territory as well.
And more territory, like Preach says. But like you say, I think you raise a good point. They've tasted democracy for 20 years. You have to remember, when Kabul 20 years ago was very different to how it is now. Most people didn't even have phone lines in their house. You had 20 years of people being educated. There may well be a political consciousness which has developed in that time.
Hopefully, resistance as well.
Possibly. I think at this point there seems to have been more resistance back in the 90s when they were in power. You had the Northern Alliance who were still around, who were strong. They're not there anymore. The territory the Taliban never had full control of Afghanistan. Let's always remember that. They by and large do now, with the exception of a few pockets, it seems. But I think we're going to have to wait and see. Maybe there'll be resistance to the Taliban, and maybe there will be a successful state that comes out of it. I don't know if that's going to ever happen in a true sense, but it's possible. And if something that does resemble a democratic or free state, or then perhaps we could say it was worth it. But we can't say that at this point. It's impossible for anyone to say this.
There's one small resistance in the Panjshir.
There is.
I don't know what they're called, but I think, yeah.
Oh,
I think it was wasn't the ex-vice president who's...
Yes.
Where the president basically evacuated from
the vice president is now
there. Vice president went to Panjshir Mountains.
He's now there.
And at the moment, the problem is, even myself, when I've been looking at the news, we don't really know who is actually controlling the area anymore, because the Taliban they're claiming that they've now conquered the area. Whereas the resistance fighters in the area said, look, they haven't even...
I'm not going... I mean, in terms of this discussion here, I don't want to go too much into the nuts and bolts of what's happening on the ground, because we don't really know, and it would be silly to claim that we do. I think we have to measure it over the past 20 years and what has actually clearly happened at the moment, and what's happened in the past. So that's how I'll answer the question. Like I say, it's up until at this point we're in now.
I think the state they're in now is that they've just come out of a state of war.
Come out of a state of war.
Yeah.
Yes, but they've also come out of a state of...
So they've been in the state of war for 20 years, and now they've come out of a state of war.
They've also come out of a state of civil society. That's, which was...
Americans left the Afghans with military equipment. They supposedly trained them. They built them up that they're going to be looking after themselves. How long can you fund another country from your own people's money? How long can you do that? 20 years, you got away with it. how many more years? You know, people are getting more woke these days.
I don't think they pulled off. I don't think personally, yeah, if they pulled out 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or even 5 years before, the same result would happen. Personally, that's what I think.
How long was
That's what I think.
America planning to prop up another government? They did it anyway. They
Yeah,
propped
but
them
the
up.
thing
They
is,
propped them up.
you can't do nation building with a country which has a complete different mentality, mindset, and culture. It's you can't implement forced democracy in to countries that don't want democracy.
So anyway, the fact that what happened was Americans left, right? They said, we're leaving now, we're taking our troops out. Don't forget, they've spent 3 trillion of, I think
it was tens. I think it was tens of. I might be wrong, but I think it's in the tens.
I don't know, I'm going to say 3 trillion to say like on a low figure, yeah? They spent 3 trillion pounds, or no, dollars, sorry, pumping up this region in terms of military, yeah. They propped up their government. They gave them enough tanks and whatever, SUVs, armored, whatever. How many millions? Yeah? No. We're talking about the Afghan military. Yeah.
I know, but it's been
You left them with military. You left them with armor. You left them with ammo. You left them with fucking hardware. Yeah. You're saying, okay, we've done our job now. We've pretty much got rid of Taliban in your country. We're getting the fuck out. It's up to you. You look after yourselves. We showed you the way, yeah?
Nobody ever.
But as soon as they pulled out,
no.
Afghans just fucking dropped their shit and let the Taliban take over.
You're a bit wrong. You're a bit wrong. No, you're a bit wrong about that. I'll tell you why. Because the pullout was a gradual process. As they were pulling out, Taliban were gaining more and more
I
territory.
don't think it felt like a gradual process.
No.
Like they pulled out and it was a
No.
takeover.
No. The fact of the matter is this. The fact of the matter is this. Yeah. The US did not all of a sudden just be like, in a blink of an eye, that's it, we're all going home, and then Taliban sweep the whole country.
If that was the case, then there wouldn't have been so much chaos.
No, it didn't. No. Let me explain to you what happened, yeah? They started pulling off their military bases bit by bit, slowly, Taliban started growing. Now, the thing is, when they started pulling off the last stage, is when they start pulling off the key areas, especially in a place like Kabul, which is obviously the capital, yeah? When they start pulling off the key areas, that's when already the Taliban had taken over certain territory, which is almost, they cornered a lot of the areas.
To validate your point, how long of a time span are you talking about that this will happen in?
I think.
Hang on a minute. Sorry, you wait a minute. You have to understand.
I believe it's months.
You have to understand.
But I can't. From what I've understood, is this happened in a matter of weeks.
Okay, you have to understand something.
Yeah, the last areas. Yeah.
So if we're gonna break down weeks into days, it might feel like, oh, there was something new coming out each day. There was a new thing. No, man.
They move fast.
Military. You're talking about a war that lasted 20 years, and you're talking about weeks of coming out.
The Taliban.
The exit needs to be longer prepared than fucking weeks.
The exit was ridiculous. Like if you look at what the Americans did is they should have got out all their citizens.
But that's not the
Wait a
point.
second.
They should wait a second.
Wait a second. They should have got all their citizens out first of all the interpreters, all the key people before they take out the army. You don't take out your army and then say, oh, okay, we have all these American citizens. Let's now do a last minute desperation.
But they were convinced the Taliban weren't going to take over that quickly.
Do you know what?
Well, they're stupid.
Do you know how
They are stupid.
Do you know how it looks to stupid people like me? It looks like the Afghan army were actually waiting for the fucking Taliban to come through because they were fucking this shit as it was.
First
They
of all,
couldn't be asked doing their own fucking jobs.
No, I
They
agree.
couldn't be asked doing their jobs. They were like, oh fucking heck, we can't wait for these Americans to fuck off. We're just gonna let them fucking take over because we're fucking tired of this shit.
Something a minute here. Do you know why? No, hang on a minute. Do you know why that is? First of all, a lot of the Afghan army were not being paid.